Alright guys, and welcome to another video. So tier 4 is around the corner with 2 new raids coming out with a total of 9 bosses. The raid bosses will definitely be a little bit of a step up from tier 4 raiding, and will be the first time we get to do some proper raiding in TBC Classic, if I'm going to be honest. It's crazy to think that the game is getting so much negativity right now when the game hasn't really properly started and we haven't really stuck our teeth into it yet, because for the average guild these raid bosses will be much more challenging than what we're used to, especially when you consider that some of the top guilds are actually having trouble with the raids in best in slot gear on the public test realm. There's already been a few nerfs and hopefully there won't be too many before the tier 5 raids are fully released. But anyway, today we'll be counting down the top 3 most challenging raid bosses that are actually coming in tier 5. It's important to note that difficulty is obviously very subjective. I know there's some people watching this video who have a lot of experience playing TBC from private servers who won't think that any of the raids in classic TBC will be difficult. I think those people should seriously question why on earth they will be even watching the video. But anyway, for the average player, I definitely think that tier 5 raiding will be much more of a challenge, particularly these 3 bosses. Difficulty is also subjective to your raid setup, particularly when it comes to tanks and specific classes that are good for specific roles. You can make fights easier or harder for yourself with your own setup.
Flood of the Deep, take you!
Anyway, the first boss on this list is Morrigan Tidewalker. This boss has been catching a few people off guard on the PTR because it can be very aggro sensitive, and people these days are a little bit trigger happy and are obsessed with getting high DPS passes. The ability Tidal Wave hits essentially in a frontal cone, dealing 3,000 to 5,000 damage, and has a nasty debuff that reduces the attack speed of a tank by 400%. Okay, and obviously this massively reduces his aggro generation. And very rarely he will actually hit the boss in really quick succession. The record that I can see is 6 times within 5 seconds. Obviously you have to get really unlucky for that to happen. So it can be hard for a warrior tank, for instance, to maintain shield block stacks. Therefore he can be crushable for 8,000 damage, which is normally basically a wipe. On top of all this, you can get really bad RNG with the ability Watery Grave that teleports a player to the other side of the room, normally out of range of the healers, and after 6 seconds deals 6k damage, and this will affect 4 total players, and this can catch people off guard because if their health is already low, then that's it, they're dead. Or too many heals get affected by the ability, which means key players like the tanks and off tanks will struggle to stay alive. One of the other awkward elements of this fight are the actual adds themselves, to which there are bundles of, and to make it worse, the Murlocs. This will be very difficult without a Paladin tank. Some leaders like to bring 2 Paladin tanks for this fight to make it much smoother, because there's just so many adds, and the pickup phase can be quite awkward, especially as a Paladin tank. You know, they don't really have many range abilities to pick up adds, and they will automatically aggro onto basically anybody in the raid, and they can easily just jump on a healer, absolutely own him, and if the Murlocs aren't picked up fast enough, then yeah, the healers and other key players are just going to start dropping like flies. So overall on this fight, pretty much everyone is always at risk of something bad happening to them, and a few good players can't really carry the bad players on this fight.
I did not wish to lower myself by engaging your kind, but you leave me little choice.
For our second boss, we have the last boss of SSC, Lady Vash, who has, fair enough, 2 fairly easy phases, but the phase in the middle is the one that will likely cause the most difficulty for most people. It's mainly all about ad management, so it requires everyone to be on the ball, switching targets and listening to the target leader, well, the raid leader, moving around and, you know, everything like that in order for the phase to go really smoothly, because, you know, if particular enemies are alive for too long, that's when you are bang in trouble. For instance, the elementals have to be killed very quickly, because if they get too close to the boss, they will despawn and then basically start to buff the boss, of which will make the next phase just near enough impossible for the tank to survive through. The Coilfang elites have to be picked up as quick as humanly possible, because they will start to cleave and probably just one-shot any cloth wearers. They'll probably be focused by melee, and melee have to be extremely careful to stay behind the mob, so they don't get hit by that frontal cleave. The Striders are also nasty because of their AoE. They can't be tanked and therefore have to be kited by a Shaman or another class. Normally the best play is to get a Shaman spamming Frost Shock. It's normally the best option because it provides a slow on the target, constantly, and it's an instant cast, so the Shaman himself isn't really at risk. Meanwhile, the other DPS have to take it down, but we have to be extremely careful not to pull aggro, which normally means you get every class that can to apply some kind of dot, and then just leave it, and then wait for the Shaman to build up the aggro before you start pumping the Strider to finish it off. There's also these tainted elementals that have to be looted for a tainted core that is actually required for pushing the boss into the next phase. The problem with this is a random person will be selected to loot the item, who could be on the other side of a room with another important job, so that can be very, very awkward if he can't move from his position. You can put free-for-all loot on, but it's also kind of risky, because if you forget to take free-for-all loot back off, people could accidentally steal loot from the boss, or accidentally on purpose do it. So when people pug this, it's going to be an absolute nightmare.
Alas, sometimes one must take matters into one's own hands. Malamor Chanal!
And lastly, we have Kelthas Sunrider, the last boss of Tempest Keep, and essentially the last boss of Tier 5. The main reason this fight is challenging is because there's just so many different mechanics going on that it can be very confusing, and the fight has a total of 5 different phases and technically 5 different bosses to deal with. In Phase 3, you have to tank all 3 of these mini-bosses all together, and each one of them has their own unique mechanics and strategy. One even has to be tanked by a Warlock tank because you can't go into melee range with her. There's a lot of awkward things like this going on when all of these mini-bosses are alive. There's so much micromanagement going on during this phase that every single raid member needs knowledge of all of the boss's little caveats, because you don't want to get caught out and end up getting one-shotted. When it comes to the phase where you can actually finally attack Kale, it doesn't exactly get any easier. This phase will really test your coordination, your reflexes and your ability to multitask, because there's just so much going on all at once. It's normally just utter chaos, and before you have enough DPS, 1 or 2 of the mini-bosses are probably still going to be alive when Kelthas releases. The first thing that's kind of complicated is how the weapons work. Their buffs have to be maintained. If you fail to micromanage the weapons in this fight, it'll probably cause a wipe. Whether it's a weapon buff falling off the tank, or someone forgetting to use the dagger to break mind control effects on people so that they just don't kill themselves. If you fail to keep on top of everything, raid members will just start to drop like flies. It doesn't help that he's casting flame strikes on the ground that you have to very quickly avoid, otherwise they do pretty decent damage to you. There's also a Phoenix ad that you have to deal with. If you don't kill the egg that drops after the Phoenix dies, then they'll respawn just like in Harry Potter. If you're looking for some good tactic guides for the raids coming up in Tier 5, I definitely recommend checking out Crix's channel and TSW's channel. They have some really good videos that help me a lot with this video. But anyway guys, my name is MetaGoblin. To the next video, ciao.